All right, we're live here. Just give us a few seconds, everybody. We're going to get live on TikTok and Instagram. So just bear with us for a second. Doesn't take too long. It takes about 10 or 20 seconds here, and then we'll get rolling. All right. Welcome to our Friday live show, everybody. Every Friday at 7 Central. I'm your host, John Lawyer. My background was as a soldier. I spent years in Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, in combat zones and deserts. And now I'm a spiritual seeker. And I really want to go out and find people to have a conversation with so we can open people's eyes to everything that's out there around the world when it comes to spirituality, religion, philosophy, self-help. And people can decide what works for them. And maybe we'll understand each other better and we can make the world a better place together. Each week we have a different co-host. I'm honored to introduce you to Troy Hadeed. He's someone who embraces love. And I really like to give someone's kind of job description as that. It's a really beautiful thing. And just for everybody out there, throughout the live stream, we're going to have Troy's website scrolling across the ticker, and it will be in the permanent description of our show notes and video. And Troy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here, John, and thank you for having me, man. I'm coming to you from Trinidad, north coast of Trinidad, in a little just over a little village called Paramin. And yeah, it's just, I started doing these podcasts about a year and a half ago, and I wish I'd started doing them like a decade ago. Because it just, it's so good to connect with people like yourself that I might never actually meet in physical body, and to have this convo and to be able to share. And I always like to thank hosts like yourself for giving people like me a voice. Because like I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of the time listeners don't realize how much work it takes to actually have a show. And, you guys deserve a lot of credit and a lot of gratitude. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, it is a lot of work, but it's worth it. And I agree with you. I think the best part of this whole thing, doing podcasts as a host or as a guest, is being able to have great conversations with people that you wouldn't normally have been able to talk to. And it's amazing. Yeah. I'm always amazed at the fact that you can share energy and you can kind of feel that through even digital mediums. So I think it's pretty cool to be able to do this.
Yeah, it's I remember my first time I actually realized that energy and messages can be conveyed over the internet was, I told you earlier, I have yoga classes on Gaia.com.
Yeah.
And that first started, one of my teachers, Ryan Legg, he gave me an opportunity to film online classes with a company called My Yoga Online. And Gaia eventually bought My Yoga Online. But I remember when I was given that opportunity, my initial reaction was no way. Absolutely not. Because I did not think that the energetics and depth of the practice could be conveyed via online class. I mean, this is probably 10 years ago. And as soon as those classes went live, I realized that I was wrong.
Yeah, I think that it speaks to, and I think that speaks to the universal connection we all have probably. When we, obviously we can feel energy in a room when someone comes in or out. We know that. But the longer we're on digital medium, I think the more we all start to realize that it speaks to something about how the universe is connected, I think, that we can all kind of experience things from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's
evolution.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm interested. I ask most guests this. I don't really have a whole lot of common questions that I ask, but there's a few. And one is, what is spirituality to you? Like, it's different to everybody. So what's your take and definition on spirituality?
I think a human experience and all of creation is spiritual in and of itself. It is impossible for someone or something not to be spiritual. So when somebody asks me a question, well, are you spiritual? My internal response is, well, who isn't? Who isn't spiritual? Or are you on a spiritual journey? I'm like, well, who isn't? Some of us just have more consciousness and more intention along that journey in a particular direction. But one of my biggest revelations was when I discovered that the word spirit, which growing up in a Catholic home, to me, spirit I associate with the Holy Spirit, divine spirit, right? It actually comes from the Latin word spiritus. And that word means to breathe. So as long as someone is breathing, that spirit is within them. They are on a spiritual journey. I mean, I personally believe that even the things that may not appear to be breathing are alive and are in itself a creation of spirit. So isn't everything spiritual? That would, that would be my perspective on it. But it really depends. Are you intentional with your spirituality?
Yeah.
Are you devotional with your spirituality? And I think that's the question that needs to be asked: is are we aware of it? Are we consciously engaging with life to try to deepen this spirituality? But I think it's impossible for someone, even for someone who says they don't believe in God or divinity or they're an atheist. In my opinion, they're spiritual. They just haven't tapped into that yet.
Yeah, I think I've had
Yeah.
some pretty spiritual conversations with atheists. I think they're more spiritual
Yeah.
than they actually give themselves credit for, honestly.
Yeah.
So no, I appreciate that definition of what it is. It is about intention and awareness. And I always tell people, it's not like I just started this spiritual journey when I suddenly had the awareness that I was on this path. Like I've been on this journey the whole time, even if I didn't realize it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's I don't know. I have lived somewhat in nature for the last 10 years, and in and out. Right, I come home to nature every night, and just sitting in nature alone for all these years. I grew up in the city like everyone else. I go and surf and so on, but I spend more time in nature probably in the last 10 years than I have for my whole life, and it's become really apparent to me, John, that there is a divine intelligence. To me, it doesn't matter what you call it, whether if you put a box around it or a label around it or a body around it, there is an intelligence. And that intelligence has created this experience for some reason. And I don't think we'll ever really understand what that reason is, but we're all part of it. And all of it to be spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've reading through a lot of your stuff. It sounds like that you've talked about it having this evolving journey that things change, and that your relationship with the divine has changed, and you've moved away from traditional religious frameworks, and
Yeah.
it's been a more intimate understanding of the beyond, of the divine,
Yeah.
of whatever we choose to call it.
Yeah. I want to be clear too that there's no it's not that in any way I think organized religion or framework is bad or wrong. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really beautiful thing, and it has its place. And for a lot of people, that is their relationship to divinity, and that is beautiful. For me, I connect a lot more to, I grew up in a Catholic home, and I connect deeply to teachings of Christ. But I see those teachings outside of the framework of organized religion or church, because I can't. Two things I'll say that I think are really substantial. I can't put a box around divinity or a box around God personally. And I think that a lot of the time we put labels and framework around something. And what we end up doing is we end up making that exclusive rather than inclusive. So we make God exclusively available to the people who are within this box and framework. And while it is not our intention, we end up saying that God is here but not there. And I don't think there's any label or limit to where God is or where God is not, or where divinity is or where divinity is not. And I do believe that God exists everywhere. And I think part of this spiritual journey is seeing the divinity in all of it. Seeing the divinity in the light, seeing the divinity in the dark, seeing the divinity in the joy, seeing divinity in the pain and the suffering. Now, I also say that from, and I'll own it, from a very privileged life. You, John, are someone who you have seen suffering. You've been at the battlefield. You've been in war. I'm sure you've been a soldier. So I understand that your views of that may be very different, because you may have seen darkness and experienced darkness and suffering that I may not be privy to, you know?
Yeah.
But and I know there's immense suffering and pain in a world that is undeniable. And when I can anticipate almost someone's reaction to me saying that God and divinity lives in the light and dark, or what appears as dark. But what for me makes the world more palatable or more digestible, I would say, to look at the pain and suffering in the world, I understand how someone might throw their hands up and say, this world is dark and evil and they want nothing to do with it and they want to walk away from it. Or make their own secure, loving bubble and live in a shell. I understand that desire. But for me, what helps me continue to show up in a world that sometimes appears as dark is to recognize that we are not our bodies. There is an existence beyond my body. And once I truly understand that, not just repeat what I've been told, but once I truly understand that there is an existence beyond my body, then that means that I am not my body. That means that John is not his body. That means that any individual in a particular body who may be experiencing a certain level of pain and suffering, that experience is temporary for them. For us, it seems like it's real, and it is real, and it's painful. And some people endure this for an entire lifetime. But even that lifetime in the scope of creation and existence is barely visible. So, and I'm not saying that this allows us to disassociate from the reality that there's pain and suffering in the world. No, the complete opposite. It allows me to stomach it and recognize that with all that I've been given, all that I've been blessed with, how dare I not at least try to make the world a better place?
Yeah.
To do everything I can to bring more love and light to the world, right? And that's how it lands for me. It's not a disassociation. It's not an excuse to go and live in my bubble. It's more of, it makes it more palatable, and it more delivers a sense of responsibility to me. To say, how dare I not at least try to make the world a better place? You know, it allows us to kind of look into darkness, stomach it, and try and bring light to that darkness.
Yeah, I really hope people can embrace that and listen to what you just said and really take it to heart. Because what I found is when you see darkness, I'm right there with you. You also realize suddenly that you have a choice whether to succumb to the darkness or make the world a better place. Like you have a choice to do it, and you have the will power. It's inside of you if you choose to let it out, and to make yourself better and lift up the whole world around you. So like it's absolutely fundamental when you think about why is there suffering, why is there pain, why is there darkness. The easiest answer for me has always been, well, what can I do about it? Well, the best thing that I can do is make the world a better place. Embrace loving kindness, embrace that loving kindness within me, have it radiate out of me, and then suddenly, if you lift yourself up, if you embrace that loving kindness, then you're this tremendous shield against that darkness, against the pain, against the suffering,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it changes the world around you. It fundamentally changes the reality that you occupy.
Yeah. I tell a story in my book, John, about an experience I had with one of my teachers. His name was Sean Corn. I don't actually think I say her name in the book. But and I tell this story because this is how it landed for me. But I was on a training with her. I think it was a leadership training. And she pretty much, I felt like she was looking at me among like a room of 80 people. And I feel like she said, you are what is wrong with everything in our world. You are a source of all the pain and suffering in our world. And I sat there and I was like, what? Because this is like, I consider her like a friend, a sister, like one of my biggest teachers. And I'm like, with all that I tried to do to make your world better, how can you, this is my internal dialogue, right? How can you possibly accuse me of that? How dare you? And I got really small and down because I respect her and love her so much that in my head, I'm like, she must be right. What am I doing wrong? And I'll tell you what I was doing wrong. And luckily, it didn't take me long to recognize. But if you believe in a collective consciousness, anyone that believes that we are part of a collective consciousness, I was busy trying to make the world a better place. But I was looking at all the light I was doing. I was looking at all the areas of my life where I was showing up from a place of love, where I was doing really positive things and having a great impact. I didn't have the courage to look at my own darkness. I wasn't looking at the areas of my life where I contributed to making people feel judged, alone, separate, and I still do today, and it's a work in progress. And when I walk past a hungry person on the street and I don't take the time to feed them, I'm contributing towards global starvation. I'm contributing to that separation and that otherness. And I think there's massive power in that realization, and there's also great responsibility. Because I'm not perfect, I still contribute to pain and suffering. Unconsciously. But when I do, I look back on that, on things I said I shouldn't have said, and things I did I shouldn't have done. And it's like, all right, noted, and I could try to do better. And I think that's where it begins. That's where the spiritual practice lives every day in our lives.
It does live every day in our lives. And
yeah.
That's the thing about, it doesn't matter what spiritual path you're walking, as far as I've been able to tell, whether you're doing a ritual here, meditation here, yoga there, but that spiritual things, how are we living our life each moment of every day? And how are we treating others? How are we treating ourselves? And when we see pain, when we see suffering, how do we interact with it? Do we turn from it and ignore it? Do we face it? I think those are important questions about how we're making the world a better place. And I often, because I got out of politics years ago. Whenever I kind of had my spiritual moment, I stopped worrying about politics. I stopped arguing with strangers on the internet, and that was very liberating. But the question I always have for people, when they get so entrenched in their areas, like, what are you doing to make the world a better place? What are you doing to help people that are outside of your own self, your own nuclear family? What are you doing to help those people around you that you have no connection to, quote unquote, no earthly connection to? You have a universal connection to them, but you don't have, like, what are you doing for those people? I think it's a great question.
I think I was on told a story recently too. I was on a podcast once with a guy who was an atheist, right? And so it was a really interesting conversation. And I could tell he was like trying to trigger me a little bit. I
Sure.
think I did really good. I think I did really good. But I explained to him that I have no doubt that there's existence beyond our bodies. And I'm gonna connect some dots here. And he couldn't understand, how can you say that? How can you know there's existence beyond your body? After that, how can you possibly know that? It's like, because it's impossible. Let me put it this way. It's impossible now for Troy and John to be same individuals who came into this conversation. It's also impossible for our listeners to end this conversation as the same individuals, because we've now shared energy.
Yes.
And that energy, John now lives in Troy, and Troy lives in John. Therefore, every interaction John had from this point on, I live in that. Same with my interactions. You live in that. And my point is that even after I die, you will live in my interactions I have today. Everything that comes through me from this point on, you will live in that, and I will live in yours. And in that, it's like there's a resonance of our actions, our words, and our thoughts that contributes to the evolution of human consciousness. And in that is our immortality. So it's about really looking at how we show up in the world. What is the resonance and vibration of our relationships? And even if Troy and John were to be in conflict and say that that interaction had a negative vibration, but can we communicate in a way in which that interaction still brings about growth and transformation after we move through that negative vibration? So in that, everything we do, say, and think carries a resonance. It carries a vibration. And in that is our immortality. If nothing else at all, in that is our immortality. You know?
I do. Those are wise words. It reminds me of the story of, a man can't step into the same river twice because he's not the same man and it's not the same river, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much. I like that idea that our immortality is that transference of energy between us.
Yeah. Energy, consciousness, evolution, all of it. All of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I very much. I don't know how you see reality, but you're talking about consciousness. I very much see like I believe there's a collective consciousness that we share, right? And I feel like we all have our bubbles of consciousness that we have as kind of individuals, right? That plug into the overall consciousness, and that pretty much shapes our reality. How do you see consciousness and reality, and how we're kind of living in the 3D?
When we use the word consciousness, I really try, John, not to be woo-woo. I don't want to be woo-woo. I don't want to be New Age spirituality. I don't want to talk about astrology and far things of the universe. Not that they aren't real. Not that they don't exist. Not that they aren't important. I believe they all exist. I believe they're important. I believe the one thing we know is that we know nothing.
Yes.
And there's certain things that I have decided not to use my time and energy trying to dig into, because it makes no sense. We can't prove it either way, and it doesn't change the way I live my life. It's not going to change the way I live my life. So when you speak of consciousness, I will just say this. My understanding of consciousness is that we are way more intertwined than we could ever possibly imagine. That this idea of John and Troy as two separate individuals is very much an illusion. While we might be two separate individuals, we are part of one whole. It's like I have 1 billion cells in my body. All those billion cells are part of my body.
Sure.
So I imagine our individual existence very much in that same way, except you zoom out like 1 billion times to actually see that framework, right? And all I know is that there's divinity in everything. And if I can choose to see God and see divinity in everything and everyone and the eyes of every human being, then it starts to shift how I show up in my life. And it doesn't mean that I can't draw boundaries. It doesn't say that I can't stand up for what I believe in. It doesn't say that I can't say no, or I can't walk away from people and situations, or I can't disagree with someone's words, actions, and thoughts. So it doesn't even mean I can't condemn someone's actions, words, and thoughts. But I can condemn someone's actions, words, and thoughts without condemning them. That's two very different things. Because when I start to acknowledge that there's divinity and God, I imagine that there's a seed of God in every individual. And a lot of the time, what we label as someone is actually their conditioning, their actions, their words, their thoughts. And we misinterpret that for who someone is. And it's not. It's just someone's conditioning. I don't know if I'm being a little off topic here, but I will finish my point on this because I think it's so powerful. Is that when we begin to see one another as beings and children of God, and we recognize that that is separate from someone's words, actions, and thoughts, that their words, actions, and thoughts is merely just their conditioning. That's, if you want to call it now, it's a keyword, trauma. People love this word now. We call trauma everywhere. Everyone has trauma. Everyone has conditioning. Everyone has trauma. That is their trauma and conditioning. That is not really who they are. And as long as we understand that and we begin to see people as part of ourselves, as an aspect of God, then this is really good. Forgiveness is no longer an option. Forgiveness is inevitable.
Yeah.
It may take time, and there may be healing that needs to happen and conversations that have to happen to facilitate that healing. It might even take generations. But in the scope of our existence, a generation is barely a second in a lifetime. But as long as we begin to see that, forgiveness is inevitable. So in a nutshell, that to me is consciousness.
That's a good explanation. I think it really, I'm a pantheist, so I see the oneness of everything. So I definitely resonate with this shared consciousness that you described.
Yeah.
One thing that you've talked about earlier was intention and awareness, and I was wondering, people get this, they're almost conditioned. We talked a little bit about conditioning. They're conditioned to think and believe a certain thing, or to not look at other things.
Yeah.
And if people have this rigid worldview that's kind of been thrust on them by society since they were little kids, how do you think people can get out of that? How do you see people becoming more intentional and aware to escape that rigidity that's kind of been like blanketed on them since they were young?
Yeah. Great question. Such a key important question, Lord John. I will say two things to that. And I remember I was on a panel discussion with a friend of mine, and he's a therapist, and he was encouraging people. This was a radio or TV show or something locally. And he was encouraging people to stand up for what they believe in, which is really important. Really important. But what's even more important is to question what you believe in.
Yes.
Question it. Is that really what you believe? Because a lot of the time, what we believe It's just what we've been told. We've been told a narrative and a story since we were 2 years old. So we grew up believing that story is true and that story is right. So, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but the only way we can really find out if that story is right or wrong or aligned or not or positive or negative, or who does that story serve? Who first told that story and why? And does that story just serve a small amount of people or does it serve a larger collective? Begin to question all of the things we believe are true. And if you still, after that authentic questioning, you still come to the consensus that yes, this is what I believe, then cool. But we have to have that courage to question. If not, we're just a puppet of some kind. We've just been conditioned and we believe that everything we've been told is true. And I think it was Einstein that said, one of the greatest signs of intelligence is being able to question your own beliefs. That is the, maybe it's not Einstein, I could be wrong, but it was said that that is the ultimate form of intelligence, is being able to question everything you think is true. Yeah. That's the first thing I would say to your question. The second thing I would say, I also think it really important is this. I'm going to use the word ego and try not to sound so woo-woo, right? Imagine that ego is in our mind. Everything that our mind is concerned with. Imagine that your mind is concerned with your body and your individual identity. Right? That is the conditioning of the mind. That is the mind's absolute priority. Now, here's the funny thing about that. Your body only knows one thing for certain, and your mind knows it as well. That you will die one day. That your body will cease to exist, and everything that is Troy and John will cease to exist. And no matter who we are, it could be a year after we die, 10 years after we die, 100 years after we die. No one will remember who we are, what we've done, what we said, or anything. Any remnants of our existence in individual form will cease to exist. Your mind knows that. But your mind knows that it only exists as long as Troy and John exist. So your mind's absolute priority is self-preservation. That is the mind's natural state of being, is survival, self-preservation. Protect Troy, protect John, protect our inner circles, protect our families, protect anything we identify with, whether that be an opinion, an ideology, a religion, a race, our immediate family. That is the mind's conditioning. For us to really begin to question our conditioning and what we think is right and true, we must begin to cultivate a relationship with our mind and our thoughts. Some people might call it meditation. Some people might find that meditation by sitting in nature. Some people might find it by surfing. Some people might find it by quiet time or prayer or religious practices. But I will describe it like this. Imagine that your mind is like are you married, John?
I am.
Right. So imagine like your mind is like your spouse. But this is a real union. There's no divorce, there's no separation. It's you and your partner for the rest of your life. And I hope I can find that one day in a partner. I haven't just yet. But you and your partner for the rest of your life. Now, if you want to cultivate a holistic, loving, nurturing relationship with your partner, there's one thing that is not in question, that must exist. That is intimacy. And I'm not speaking to physical intimacy. I'm speaking to just spending time with your partner. Spending time to try to understand your partner, listen to your partner, get to know your partner, so that you can cultivate this holistic, loving relationship. And one of the scariest things in our world today is that most people can't sit with themselves for 2 minutes. To us, spending time alone, we pick up this thing, or we go on Netflix, or we watch TV, or we might even pick up a book, and books are great. But can we actually spend time with ourselves and our thoughts? For a lot of us, that is so uncomfortable, and so much pain comes up, so much darkness comes up. But the only way we can really turn darkness to light is by having courage to look at it and see it and walk into it. And my experience is that the second you do that, the second you embrace the dark aspects of ourselves, they want to be seen. They want to be seen. They want us to turn the lights on. So to answer your question, John, to really begin to recondition, we have to begin to cultivate a relationship with our mind and look at how our mind governs how we show up in the world. You know?
I do. Yeah, that's a wise response, and I think the wisdom is people when they think about mind and ego, especially in modern spirituality, they get caught up in like ego death and I got to kill my ego, I got to get rid of it. But the thing is, you're describing it in a much more calm, peaceful, and beautiful way, because it's not killing it, it's not getting rid of it, it's accepting that it's there and having a relationship with it. And I believe people will see a much higher degree of success in finding that alignment of mind, body, and soul. Yeah. If they're able to have and cultivate that relationship with their mind and their ego in a way that they know it, they accept it, and they learn to live with it. Because, and you so accurately describe, it's just trying to keep us alive, which is its job.
Yeah. And you know what? You know what, John? I say this in a book too. You hit it nail on the head. It's about befriending the ego.
Yeah.
It's about befriending the ego. Because if I kill my ego, the ego has a purpose. If I'm saying the ego has no purpose, then I am saying that the human experience is useless.
Right.
Why am I even here? Why are we even given an ego and an individual sense of identity if there's no purpose behind it? Right? So it's about befriending our ego and realizing that this body is not actually who I am. Because I believe that when we start to glimpse that, is when we begin to understand what it means to love. And it's an ongoing process. And even like every day I look back on my life and the things I look at that I said or I did, I'm like, man, I knew better. But that's the mind's ego's conditioning, that we constantly have to begin to unravel these layers. Because the ego's conditioning is self-preservation. Like I said, it's all about, what do people think about Troy? How do people see Troy? Will people like Troy? Will people accept Troy? Will people love this podcast? Will people buy his book? All that is ego, right? It's all aspects of self-preservation. And I'll share with you one of my favorite stories. It's from Krishna Das and Ram Das, so I don't know if you've ever heard of. I'm sure
Ram Das, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So you may have heard of Neem Karoli Baba, which is their guru or their teacher. And I'm not a big guru guy. I'm really not into guru culture. But there are a few saints and teachers and gurus that that I really connect to And the way they showed up really speak to me in a profound way. And he's one of them. And from all that I've read and been told, he never actually taught any practices. Like people wanted yoga poses and breathing practices and prayers they could do and all this stuff. And anytime somebody asked him, well, how do you find God? Give us something to do. He would say, well, serve people, feed people, tell the truth, love people, remember God. That was his teaching. And I remember a story when some of his disciples went to him and they said Baba, which means teacher in Sanskrit, in Hindi. They said, Baba, how do we find God? Tell us how we find God. And he said, meditate like Christ. So they was like, they ran off all excited. He finally gave us something to do. And they ran off, and his story goes that they finally sit and they run off and they huddle together. And then it dawns on them. They was like, well, how did Christ meditate? So then they go back to him and they say, Baba, you told us to meditate like Christ. But how did Christ meditate? And of course, I wasn't there. I'm retelling a story they tell. I like to make that clear. But it said that Neem Karoli Baba, he paused for a moment and he got really quiet and tears began to run down his face. And he says, he lost himself in love. That's how Christ meditated. He lost himself in love. And I think that's how we remember what it means to love, is we have to try every day to overcome a hold that this sense of individual identity has on us. And I choose my words carefully, not to kill it, to be in relationship to the hold it has on us, so that we can remember what it really means to show up from a place of love, what it really means to love others. And that's not always making someone happy. That's not always making someone love us or like us or share this post or like this podcast. Sometimes it's telling people the very thing they don't want to hear. You know, and saying the things that you know might get you criticized. That's it. The Christ was a revolutionary. He was a rebel.
Absolutely, rebel. Yeah.
There are so many people that didn't really like him too much, you know? And I think there's so much in that idea of losing ourselves in love, losing ourselves to remember what it means to love, you know?
Yeah, for whatever reason, the theme that's been coming up for me a lot recently on reflection on love and on this is surrender. Because surrender doesn't mean you give up. That's not what it is. When you surrender, especially when you surrender yourself to the universe, to the divine, or whatever it is that we call this thing, then suddenly it lessens there's no resistance, because when the resistance is what's holding those judgments and of ourselves, those judgments of other people. It's that resistance to forgive ourselves, that resistance to forgive others. And so when you surrender, suddenly it removes the resistance. And like you said, we're humans, and to err is human. And so we're imperfect. We still struggle with this. We can talk about it. We can teach it. We can even experience it. We're not perfect, so we're still going to have resistance. We're still not going to be able to surrender. But there's something in the act of trying to surrender that's super enlightening.
Yeah. They have in a book, in a chapter, I think it's chapter 3 in the book, it's hope and faith. And it compares the two, of course. And the comparison is that hope is actually a lack of faith, because it creates so much room for doubt and anxiety and worry. Whereas faith is an absolute knowing. It's a complete knowing that we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Right.
And that large intelligence is guiding us and holding us. And the reason I bring this up is because in that chapter, I use a term I call conscious surrender. So like you said, it's not the act of surrendering to defeat. It's the act of surrendering consciously to acknowledge that maybe there's something here for us to learn. Maybe there's a dream here that is bigger than our dream, because our individual dream is this big. But then there's a larger collective dream that we are part of that is so much bigger. And maybe we're playing a part in creating that dream, you know? So I have really connected to this term of conscious surrender, which is actually the ultimate act of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up, because I was actually going to ask you about hope and faith because of that chapter. So that was a perfect place to talk about it, and connect it back into surrender. I love that.
Yeah.
And it really is about. I'm wholly with you when you describe yourself as someone who is love, and that's your job. And that's you're not a yoga teacher. It's I'm here to talk about love, because that's the ultimate conversation. Because it does go back to loving kindness.
Yeah. Now here's the thing too, though, John, and I'm sure to say this. I am love. We are all love. Hence why the book is said, "My name is love. We're not all that different." But sometimes we forget who we are.
Oh,
I forget who I am. Yeah, I forget who I am every day. And part of this spiritual journey is remembering who we are. And I just like to say that because I want to make it clear. I'm not saying I am love. I have it figured out. The fact is that we are all love, and we all are on the journey to remembering.
Yeah, I think it. And when you say "don't forget who you are," that also goes back to what you were talking about earlier about who we are. Who am I? I'm not my body. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my possessions. I'm much more than that. So it goes back to asking that question. Who am I? And you talked about Ram Dass, and I've enjoyed reading Ramana Maharishi, the spiritual teaching of Ramana Maharishi. Who am I? Asking that question. And even Ram Dass talks about it in his book. We've talked about it in the show before, but where he was on psilocybin, and that was where he had his first kind of spiritual experience, where he saw that he wasn't the cello player that he wasn't the professor of psychology at Harvard, he wasn't the pilot of the Cessna, he wasn't the owner of the boat, he wasn't from the wealthy neighborhood in Cambridge or whatever. He wasn't any of that. He was something much deeper than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how much more time we have, John, but a few years ago I went into an experience where I went into, I'm sure you've heard of the dark retreats, where people go into absolute darkness. And I went into this dark retreat, and I'll just be brief, but I went into that room with this same question: who am I? Because I recognized that everything I defined myself by was in relation to the external world, right? I am a human being because this is a book. I am a male because I know what a female is. I am in Trinidad because I know John is somewhere else. But everything, even opinions, I can believe X because someone else believes Y. But if there was nobody to believe Y, then would I even believe X, right? Every single thing we define ourselves by is in relationship to things and people around us.
Yeah.
So I went into this room thinking that if I removed everything and I sat in this room of absolute, complete darkness where you can't even see your hand for a prolonged period of time, that I would discover who I was. Who am I? And I did get a glimpse of who we are, not who I am, who we are. And I mentioned it earlier, and that is what I am, what we are, is the resonance and vibration of our relationships. That is what lives forever. And that is what will never die. And that is where our energy is. That is who we are. So,
Yeah, I think.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, so with that understanding, it's like, do I want my resonance, my contribution to human evolution and all of creation for the rest of time be one of love, be one of light, or do I want it to be one of fear, negativity, and darkness?
And I think people can see that if they just think about the life they live and how we go through our lives. The most powerful thing that we remember, for good, for better and for worse, for good and bad, are relationships. We remember those amazing relationships. Remember those ones that ended up in a black hole. But we remember them, and we remember them at this very base and visceral level. And so if you lead with love, you're also going to attract those better relationships to you, right? Like you're going to end up in better situations because things attract like things. It's a magnetic thing. So
yeah, or there's a flip side to that. You know, I could talk a lot here, John. So tell me if you want me to stop. But my other part of the reality as well is that we're all part of a curriculum, right? And we all have work to do. And each one of us have a separate curriculum where we've come to learn to love and to navigate that curriculum, to evolve any ways we need to evolve. But I am part of your curriculum, and you are part of mine. So a lot of the time, we will actually attract negative. Because if I have this capacity to love, then I might gravitate to me the areas that actually need to experience what love is. And the people that need to experience what love is, right? Because that's the work I've come here to do. And at the same time, I might think I know how to love when life is flowers and rainbows and everything is pretty and everything goes how I want it to go. But when the shit hits the fan, can we still love then? Can you love now? One of my same teachers, Sean Cohen, Joe says, can you love now? Can you love when things aren't going how they want you to love? What does that love look like?
yeah.
So in that way, yeah, we attract this vibration. But because we aren't separate, because we are so intertwined, we will also attract the places and the people that need to experience love.
And I think the fact that one of the reasons that as we become more aware and intentional with our spirituality, with our exploration, with our curiosity, the ability to handle those times where it gets hard is part of what it's all about. Is how do you handle it when it gets hard? I mean, I think about that. Like we all have those days or those weeks or those months, sometimes years, where we ask ourselves, can I keep down this path? Can I keep doing these things that I want to do, that I know I need to do? Yeah. Maybe I don't have the time to do them. Maybe I don't have the space to do them because of all these things that I perceive that are happening to me. And so what do I do in those moments? And I find that the more grounded and centered I am in myself and my I don't know, divinity or spirituality, whatever you want to call it, the better I'm able to handle those times of life now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on, you know, John. It's like whatever practice that is, whether your practice is going to church, whether your practice is yoga, whether your practice is meditation or mosque or prayer or chanting or plant medicine or whatever. These things are not in medicine. These things are, I like to say, this also came to me in darkness, but I like to say all of these things are meaningless. They are useful. They are useful because they help us create a balance. They help us get over ourselves so that we can show up from a place of love for everyone else, so that we can remember who we are. They are useful, but these things in and of themselves are not a medicine. I could practice yoga for 2 decades or meditate in a cave for 40 years or go to church every day and pray for 5 hours or mosque or whatever it is for decades. It doesn't mean I'm any closer to realization or God or enlightenment than the addict on the side of the street.
Right.
Right? A practice is love on God. That is the ultimate practice, is love on God. And it's so important, like you pointed out, that we find our practices, we find our medicine in our lives that can help us embrace this larger one practice that really matters, which is love on God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could put that on a stone and just put it in the town square, and we'd all be better off, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is always love. You know, I didn't get through a lot of my notes for the show, which is always a good sign. I always like to have an open and free flowing conversation. We could talk forever, and I would actually love to have you back on sometime just to talk about yoga because I'm a universalist. I believe in a lot of different things, but I have an affinity for Hinduism, and I appreciate the traditions of yoga, and I would like to get your take on it eventually. Maybe we could have you on again, and
anytime you just say
just go into yoga. I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't talked about tonight that you want to tell the audience?
Wow. I don't know. I guess what's coming to me right now is that we live in a world that right now there's a lot happening in the world, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of disconnect. And it can sometimes be really overwhelming. But what I would love the audience to recognize and hear is that we do make a difference, every one of us. Every social media post, every like, every conversation, every seemingly insignificant interaction with an absolute stranger that you might never see again in your life. That interaction with that individual on that day who is triggering you and being mean to you and trying to make you lose your shit, in that moment, our reaction to that, these things change the world. We make a difference every day. And I understand the world is overwhelming. I understand people in pain. People are showing up with immense trauma and conditioning because they're in pain. And sometimes first of all, we want to run and hide. I get it. And sometimes we need to, for a brief moment.
Sure.
For a brief moment, I understand we need to move away so we can regroup, recenter ourselves so that we can show back up in the world from a place of love. I get it. But I'll say one thing. We do make a difference. You do make a difference. And how dare we, with all that we've been given, in all the ways that we've been blessed, because all of us have been blessed in some way, how dare we not at least try? How dare we not at least try to make the world a better place and to show from a place of love and to see our own darkness and bring light to that darkness?
That's an amazing message. And thank you so much for taking your time to be here tonight and give us that message. And, you know, we've had your website scrolling on the ticker this whole time. Definitely would like you to talk about your book before we head out and, you know, make sure people know about it. Is there anywhere else or anything that you would like to direct people to before we head out?
Well, I am my social media platform of choice at the moment is Instagram, so they can find me there. They can on my website, of course, troyhadeed.com. They can buy my book on my website. They can also buy my book on Amazon, or go into every bookstore they see and request my book and tell them they need to have it on their shelves. That always helps. But yeah, just I'm available. I'm here if anybody wants to reach out, has questions, has comments. I am on Gaia.com, like I said in my Instagram link. There's a link to 7 days free on Gaia. We have our own yoga studio in Trinidad that streams live classes from Trinidad. It's called beyondyogatv.com. All those links are on my website and Instagram. So if you go there, you find them. And I just want to say thank you, John. Yeah.
Yeah, and I encourage the audience, go check that website out. Definitely get Troy's book. It's great. It's got a great message, and check his yoga stuff out. His stuff on Gaia is great. Definitely vouch for all that. And so definitely go to the website, check Troy out. There's just really great stuff over there. And I wanted to let everybody know we have show again next Friday, 7 Central, same time. We're going to have a guest co-host. Her name is Lindsay Shannon. She's a psychic medium. She's a Reiki energy healer and a spiritual mentor. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. But Troy, thank you so much. If you stick around for just a minute after we end the live here, we'll say our goodbyes.
Yeah.
Good night,
Love.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys. Love.